Alright, so for our next original versus remake thing, I wanted to go into The Hitcher, even though we did talk about the original Hitcher like 6 years ago on this channel, as a versus with something else. I feel like this was inevitable anyway, because I've just always had this sort of surprising affection for the remake with Sean Bean from 2007. So, I figure we can go ahead and kind of revisit The Hitch, or maybe talk about some things we didn't talk about before, and go into how it compares with the remake, or how the remake compares to it. Because these are two movies where, when you watch them and you watch the events unfold, with the exception of a couple of character placements, they are basically the exact same movie, which is really interesting because they basically have two totally different vibes, despite being more or less the exact same movie. Where maybe you could say the original movie is a bit more cerebral and mysterious about itself, and like many horror movies in the 2007 era, the remake just kind of wears itself just out there freely. But there's maybe more to take away from it than that. So, to talk about the general concept, it's this obviously age-old concept where you pick up a stranger off the road and you don't have any idea who anybody could be, and anybody could also be a serial killer or maybe something even worse and something more inherently evil or something like that. And of course, it's brought about by you put yourself in this situation by thinking you're doing something good for somebody else, and then evil just overtakes you instead. So I do know that there were a lot of criticisms at the time for the original movie seeming sort of like nihilistic and kind of pointless in like its cruelty and its darkness. But that's kind of just the scary factor, I feel like, because it is a horror movie, and that's kind of the... I feel like especially at this time, because the concept seems so cut and dry, that it would make sense if people were sort of unexpectedly pulled into this really dark and twisted world that just seemed like this hell that there was no escape from. And we get that point of view through the C. Thomas Howell character, Jim. And obviously the big difference here right away between the two movies is the fact that a lot of the terror from the original movie comes from the fact that Jim is alone, and he has to make his own decisions and deal with everything just completely solitary, and how that's another one of those sort of hellish nightmare feelings of just being alone in this, especially when you're out in the middle of nowhere and isolated. Um, the remake makes it a couple with Sophia Bush and Zachary Knight, and so there are going to be differences there as far as like when you're alone with a character like Rutger Hauer's John Ryder. There are these great moments where even though the movie starts right away, like the terror is just immediate. There are these moments where it's like when Rutger Hauer's first talking to him and he's talking about, like, I think he says he needs gas or something is what his excuse is. And, you know, that seems reasonable enough. So, as they're driving down the road and Howard's getting more and more intense very, very quickly, we have these real moments with C. Thomas Howell where he starts sort of laughing along with him. And it's one of those cases where you can almost see somebody that's, like, wants to convince them. They know they're in a scary situation and they're trying to convince themselves that it's not a scary situation. And that's where his kind of laughter comes from to go with him. And so, immediately, like I said, it just starts right away with, like, the first minute. But because we have two characters in The Hitcher and two different decision makers that are making that have two different ideas of what to do about this, we actually have this interesting moment where the first time they see Ryder, they don't pick him up, and they drive off because Sophia Bush says, we've got to get out of here, this could be a serial killer, because she's got the right idea. She's seen a few horror movies, and like, maybe she's seen the original movie for all we know. And so when the reason that Ryder actually ends up in the car with them is essentially an awkward social situation, which is an interesting take on it, where they end up running into him again at the gas station, and the creepy clerk is there, and they're basically put in this position where it's like, if they don't give this guy a ride, they basically look like pieces of shit. And it's like, there's really... as far as awkward social situations, it's like there's kind of no way out of this without looking like an asshole. And when you think about the human nature of just not wanting to look like an asshole can make you make decisions that otherwise might be totally out of character for you. Not to mention that he seems to have taken being abandoned on the road pretty well, so it's the idea of, well, maybe this guy isn't such a psychopath. I mean, Sean Bean's got, like, like a charm about him, and he seems fine enough. He's posing as like a married person. I'm actually still not quite sure what's going on with the payphone. If that was all just a ruse, and that he knew who Jim was immediately. But yeah, he successfully puts this ruse out there and gets in the car with them. Then, after all this sort of introduction, we get what is the opening scene, the very, very first scene of the original movie. And honestly, I can get behind both of these. I do think it makes the original movie a lot more unique, that it just is happening immediately as soon as the opening credits are over. It is going and straight into terror. And here where we kind of get a bit of build up with all that, but once again, once Sean Bean's actually in the car with them, the pacing is pretty much about on point with how the scene goes down in the original movie, where it's pretty much immediate. We just get little extra details in there, like when he, after he shows the knife and he's, like, picking things out of it, which is disgusting in a sadistic way. That's just a starting point of what the direction this movie's going as far as how hardcore it wants to go. But I suppose we can talk about that, about how, the original movie just had a real hardcore feeling about itself. Like I said, I feel like it kind of blindsided people at the time. And it just has this general nature of being relentless, and it just feels like so draining and exhausting with how much terror there is and how much danger there is, and how we're in the situation that we just can't get out of. And so that's basically how it captured its tone. This, like, just having this vibe of this is a character that's unstoppable, where like he's almost supernatural, and it didn't really have to go out of its way apart from its one initial path to make us feel that way. Because we're dealing with a 2007 horror movie with the remake, where things were trying a little harder to be, oh, look how hardcore we are, and look how, scary we are, or whatever, how dire we are. We do get moments like when he's this very early scene when Ryder's in the car with the family. And so, in the original movie, that's a scene that takes us by surprise because he appears again so suddenly. And this was after Jim had such a triumphant moment of getting Ryder out of the car and back onto the road. And so, to immediately, like, this moment of triumph is so short-lived, and that immediately is starting into play the helplessness that's going to come into Jim's character as it goes on, is that he can't have, like, one moment of triumph without it immediately being shot down by an immediate reappearance by Ryder, like he's a ghost. And, the same thing for the couple in the remake, where they get their moment where they get him out of the car, but then once again, just like in the original movie, he reappears in the car with this family. And that in itself, just the fact that the family dies in the movie is so emotionless about that. Like, just saying, this is the situation as it is, this is how unstoppable Ryder is, and how much it doesn't matter who or what you are, or what age you are, or anything like that. If you come into Ryder's path, you are just going to die, and that's it. Like I said, they set that vibe without straying from that, or adding little other details to it. The remake really goes all in on we want you to feel like, oh, we're going so far, oh, we're pushing the envelope. Because not only does he kill the family, but they make it like a comically religious family that has like a honk if you love Jesus bumper sticker. And then after they have found the murdered bodies, and particularly the child in the back seat, we get a shot as Jim's throwing things out of the back seat. One is like a children's sort of workbook or coloring book that's covered in the kid's blood, and it says, "Will I go to heaven?" And it's like, that's a lot. That's trying really hard to get some sort of, to put it in some sort of place. But there's also, they keep doing that with kids, because for starters, it's funny that they tried to get a lot of sympathy using kids when they immediately kill one. Because the other two scenes I'm thinking of are when there's the massacre at the police station, and for no reason at all, there's a shot in one of the dead officers' offices is a picture of like a kid's baseball team. So there's that, and then there's the moment at the end when Ryder's being escorted, and the guy in the cop in the passenger seat that we know is about to be massacred is going on and on and on about the teddy bear he's getting his daughter for her birthday. And it's like that. That's really, really. It was laying it on thick the first time, and they did it like 3 more times, and it's like you get the edgy sense that 2007 in general was going. The 2000s in general was going for with their horror movies, especially this middle portion, which we've talked about a lot. That era of horror and how it wasn't our finest hour of horror, but like I said, there's still things of warrant in this movie. If you want to talk about something that I actually like in the lead-in to that scene where he kills the family, and it's a scene that comes from them being 2 people instead of 1 person like C. Thomas Howell was. The clever sort of misdirection that they use, where like let's say you're watching the remake and you don't know anything about the original movie, so you don't know that this family car is about to get massacred. So when they're driving up and they see a family and they see the kid playing in the back window, this detours into a conversation where Sophia Bush talks about, hey, do you want to have kids? Have you thought about having kids? And it's like, and then if you're your guard is down because we've just kicked Ryder out of the car, and you think, oh, well, there's going to be more breathing room here, so nothing's going to happen yet. You think this is that family car is just to spark this conversation about them possibly having kids. And then it sneaks up on you that the purpose of this family car is the fact that Ryder is inside it. So it's a kind of a nice little bit of misdirection that they have that conversation, and that's something you can do when it's 2 characters, especially 2 characters that are a couple. So that's fine, but it does, a lot of it, as far as them being a couple, is just sort of blame throwing, where the idea of Jim, it was Jim's idea to basically, Jim said yes to give him a ride, and Sophia Bush was the one saying no, don't pick up any strangers at all. And so that does kind of turn into I told you so, oh, it's not my fault, and back and forth and all that. It kind of stalls the character work a little bit, which we see in C. Thomas Howell's performance constantly as it goes. But we'll talk more about that. The next thing I want to talk about is that sort of helpless feeling, where it's like around every corner, just when we think there might be a little bit of hope, or maybe Jim will get just a slight, one-up over Ryder, something just completely shoots it down again. And like I said, that feeling, that's not just in the opening scenes, but it's relentless throughout. So we get this moment when he's being interrogated in the original movie, and he goes through the whole thing, and we think that he's in deep shit, but then the cop just immediately doesn't believe it. Like, he just immediately says, no, that kid's definitely not a killer. And it's like, oh, okay, so we're not going down, these typical paths that we go down with these. And it's like, oh, here's another potential way out. And no, like all the other potential ways out, just immediately another massacre comes. And I like the way they capture that in the remake also, where they bring in the Neil McDonough character a lot earlier, where Captain Estridge, played by Jeffrey DeMunn, who has like a whole credit here at the top, is barely in the movie at all, and it feels like he's kind of somewhat built up to, but then he's just kind of another cop character at the end of the day, and there's nothing really significant about the character, as far as, apart from, like Ryder's arrest and stuff like that, but as far as like the role he plays like throughout the story is practically non-existent. So I really love the idea of bringing in Neil McDonough to do, I think he's a lieutenant in this one. But he's a character that's like present throughout, and he's the one where we kind of see through his eyes of where are the cops going to go, what do the cops believe or not believe. So we have that same moment that we had in the original, where it was like he immediately knows, no, these kids didn't do this. He sees the rioting and blood that Ryder did behind the window, and it's like, no, there's definitely a third person here, and it definitely isn't these people. And so it's like, okay, good, we have a moment of, okay, somebody believes them, now we can go forward, and hopefully they can get out of this. And then the moment where it looks an awful lot like Sophia Bush has shot a cop in the head with a lot of witnesses, because Ryder has a rifle now. And then that immediately turns Esther's around, where it's like, and you think about that, where it's like, oh dude, but you had it, you just believed it, why are you turning around so quickly? It actually is pretty easy to buy from his scenario, where he's only talking to her through like his walkie-talkie. So when this woman that sounds kind of crazed that he doesn't know is coming on saying, "Oh no, I didn't kill anybody. We're being set up." The cops that he knows and works with are telling him, "We saw her shoot somebody. We saw her shoot him in the head." It's easy to buy that he immediately turns around and will believe, who he knows, and not this potential stranger that looks an awful lot like they've killed people. So that's something that could have been frustrating in another movie, where he kind of goes back and forth, but I do think they make it believable enough. Actually, interesting enough, there's one thing that I feel critical of about this scene. It's how they kind of dampen the suspense of it with cutting back and forth to the cops, because we do have this whole confrontation where Ryder walks out of the abyss and just suddenly has this rifle. And when you're like in a wide open space, a dude chasing you with a rifle could probably be like the worst case scenario, because you're just in the wide open and just a full-on target. And so while he's pursuing them, and then the cops are getting involved in this, in this ultimate scene where she looks like she has shot one of them, we cut back and forth to Neil McDonough like at the station and going through all that stuff. When this, for full suspense, them being pursued by Ryder with a rifle should probably be a scene that doesn't cut back and forth with any other scenes. So that's something that really kind of dampens suspense a little bit, and something where they could have been a bit more careful about how they inserted the cops into this. Because I've had criticisms in the past about the original movie, where I thought the dynamic between Jim and Ryder was so good and really driving the story by itself, and the fact that it made it feel so isolated, that I felt like the cops kind of got involved a little too much into the story, and got involved too early into the story. But that I have warmed up on that over time, where the inclusion of the cops and the fact that it's like Ryder's essentially setting them up in a sense. But like I was saying, it does feel like there's a difference here when you look at the Ryder character and what exactly is he? Because with Sean Bean's character, I feel like he's a character that does just kind of feel like a killer. He's the guy that'll just kind of antagonize you, like, for the sake of it, or antagonize you for sport, or kill people for sport. He's the guy that would, like, go to the bar and just see who he could get to start a fight with him, and then have an excuse to, like, kill that person or something. He's that kind of guy. But he has a force of nature quality to him. The way we get scenes, like whenever he just shows up in another random car, knowing there's probably a body that once owned that car, or like when he walks out of the abyss with a rifle or something like that. But you could get the sense that this is a guy that would just, cause a bunch of murder and then just frame these unsuspecting people for it. With Howard, it's a whole different thing, because this character in particular, at the very start, he just seems all too real, but there's, sometimes he seems all too real, and sometimes he seems supernatural. And there's such a blurry line there that we're never quite sure which Ryder we're getting from scene to scene. Whether it's going to be the Ryder that just sort of feels like a ghost, or the Ryder that could just reach out and stab you or strangle you because he's so incredibly real. And the idea of, does he want this to stop, or does he want it to go on forever? Because there's the moments where he's killing people, and the more the cops get involved, the more they chase them, or him, Jim by himself. But Ryder just keeps resurfacing and keeps killing around Jim, but not Jim himself. And it's like you get the sense that he just wants to torture Jim forever and ever. Like there's no end game. But then on the other side of that, in like the first scene, when he says, why are you doing this? And Ryder says, I want you to stop me. And, that could just be part of, like, a game of some sort, but I always kind of took it as he's a character that's, like, part of him does just want to end all of this, but it's almost like he's such a almost supernatural force that he can't even stop himself. But, like, it's that same thing, though, where it's like, it feels like he also wants to make it go on forever. So it's like this sort of... I feel like the confusion is part of it, is part of the hell that Jim is trapped in. Where it's like, does he want this or does he want this? And it's like, when the fact that you have to keep asking that is just the chaos itself. And so there's that. But I mean, we do get these other moments, though, where it's like he does want to stop it. Like when he gives Jim bullets for his empty gun. Or when he's, after he's been arrested and he's in the interrogation room, and he just says that he's tired. And it's like he's been just down this path, just killing people at a seemingly supernatural level for so long, that he actually is ready to just be stopped. He even gives Jim the moment to kill him in the truck, but then he's put in this dilemma to where it's like, he could finally end this nightmare with Ryder, but he would kill Jennifer Jason Leigh in the process if he did. And so just keep putting him in these positions. It's just, there's just something so, like, otherworldly about it. And there's something otherworldly about a lot of Rutger Hauer's performances and his general presence that he was able to really capture well. And it's like, if ever there was a role to just use it in full force, it was this one. And like I said, Sean Bean doesn't really have... He has a force of nature vibe, but he doesn't have, like, that sort of almost supernatural, hellish, nightmarish vibe that the others do. He feels like a character that's in a relatively real world that may go a bit over the top, but it doesn't feel over the top in, like, a nightmarish sense. It feels over the top in a, this is a 2007 horror movie kind of way, so... there's that. There's nothing particularly cerebral like there is with the stuff that with Rutger Hauer and what he's doing. Like, so we get like one moment where Ryder says, "I want to die" when he's in the truck. That gives you that vibe that Hauer has, where it's like, does he really actually just want this to end? But we don't know, because this is not a mind you can get inside. And so, what I do actually think is interesting, if you want to look at it from a sort of almost otherworldly perspective or a supernatural perspective. The remake, while it's all about Ryder in the original movie, at the very beginning here, in the opening moments of the remake, there almost seems to be this implication that it's the highway itself that's the bringer of death, which I actually find really interesting, because we start with that statistic where it just talks about in general the number of deaths on the highway per year or something. And then that moment of kind of overkill where we show the title as a rabbit is getting run over. So it's like, I feel like that's the vibe they were kind of going for, even though we don't really explore that outside of these opening scenes, like literally when the title is shown and the statistic before it. But I actually do like the idea of Ryder just being a part of a grand scale, just sort of darkness and evil that lurks on the highway itself. But like I said, it doesn't really explore that, so it just becomes the killer's kind of chasing the movie. But another thing it does kind of give the vibe of is, there is that moment when the remake's Jim has to drop off Sophia Bush to the bathroom right as they leave, and just as they're starting their journey, the first thing he finds is a penny on heads, which is, of course, you know, the good luck superstition. And then obviously what happens after he's picked up this penny that was heads up. So the takeaway from that, I guess, is that there's no amount of luck that was going to help them for what was about to come with Ryder himself. So you take that into account and the highway thing into account, and I guess there is something a little more almost outside the human world about what's going on here. But like I said, the original movie kind of does that so effortlessly by just being relentless but not straying off its own path, that it's a lot more impressive about the way it handles that. Now, as far as there being, we kind of mentioned Jennifer Jason Leigh and how she comes into this, and what's interesting about the fact that the remake did take the couple route, I think that's especially an interesting choice, because kind of the fun of Jennifer Jason Leigh's inclusion in the original movie is that you think she's going to be a love interest, and it seems like we are kind of going down that path until it's abruptly cut off or pulled apart or whatever you want to say. Because the interesting thing about Leigh's character is that you almost might wonder if she even has a purpose at all. But what I like about the inclusion of this character is that they do kind of set up that it's believable for her to get involved in the way that she does, with this one moment she has where she's talking about when Jim wants to call for help, and she talks about it took like a guy got shot outside of the diner, and it took the cops like 45 minutes to show up, and it's like the fact that it took he eventually died, and the fact that it took that delayed help that ended up not being helpful, and the guy died, and she has like this sort of disgusted feeling. Like you get this sense of disgust that she has when she tells that story. And so she's a person that sets up that she's a person that can't just watch things happen. If somebody is in need of help, she will jump on it. Not just because of the kind of person she is, but what she's seen and what happens when you don't jump in to help can be the worst case scenario. But like the concept itself of picking up a stranger when you think you're helping them and you're pulled into this world of evil instead, the same thing happens to her in a different way, where she goes into something with good intentions, hoping she can help, and what happens to her happens to her. So, where it kind of fits that theme a little bit. Like I said, whatever you think that theme may be, like I said, I know a lot of people think it's just kind of nihilism for the sake of nihilism, but it's like, is there a sort of good triumphing over evil here sort of thing? And it's like, it's basically just, can you wake up from the nightmare? Which is essentially what the climax is. But, and that's, I didn't even go into the motel scene that Jennifer Jason Leigh also takes a part in, where this is where she gets taken and put in between the trucks, and the scene where he's like up against the wall, more in darkness, and then he's just in bed with her, which is insanely creepy. But like I said, the 2007 movie just always wants to take it up just that little tiny disturbing notch, where we get the moment when he climbs into bed with Sophia Bush, and of course, because we have the couple story going on, she thinks it's Jim, so she's happy to think that this is Jim in bed with her. And so when Ryder attacks and she realizes that it's him, Sean Bean says, "Yeah, I'm fucking horny too." And it's like, Jesus Christ. And it's like, by the way, worth noting, because I haven't mentioned this yet, I think Sean Bean is kind of excellent in this. Because he does have that, he started off with that charming vibe of a guy that just needed a ride, and then the way the darkness takes over, and the way he does just have this sort of emotionless way about killing. Like, there are those moments that he relishes in from time to time, like that one. But for the most part, the way he plays this sort of emotionless killer whose head you just cannot get into. It is just a trap door that you cannot get into. It is just locked. It's a vault. Like, you just cannot get in. And that's, like I said, that kind of takes away from the cerebral vibe that the original movie had more, but as far as the performance goes and the relentlessness of it, I do think Sean Bean is great in this. And as far as the other performances, the idea that C. Thomas Howell is so great in the original movie because his character kind of gets to evolve, where it's like he starts as a character that's really easily intimidated, which is how he got in this situation in the first place. And then as it goes on and we see him basically, there's the fear, but then the way the fear kind of turns into this, brink of insanity. And then as that continues to go on, and Ryder keeps killing cops and he keeps getting deeper in this situation, there's the moment where Jim is just stranded in the desert and just starts to laugh. And there's a whole gauntlet of things here. He starts to laugh, then he contemplates suicide, and then he just breaks down and just cries from the helplessness. And so that, putting us in that vibe of what these, like, talking about how all this ruthlessness kind of puts us in this strained situation, in this hopeless situation, that is already potent enough in itself. But the thing that was really, really going to drive that home for certain was C. Thomas Howell's performance and his reactions to it, and us watching him go through it, and go through that gauntlet of emotions. And as far as the, original movie or as far as the remake goes, it's Sophia Bush that kind of has to go through that arc, but like I said, because there's two of them, and they're both kind of making decisions here, the only kind of arc that we kind of see by the time we get to going into the third act is when Jim, apologizes and said, "I'm sorry I got us into this." And it's like that kind of ends the blame-throwing sort of factor. But it's only just kind of been, desperate running. The desperate running that you would see in a typical horror movie. And it's only like right at the very end here we see Sophia Bush's change, where she becomes this sort of killer herself. And it is the great moment when Ryder tries to say, like, doesn't it feel good to have the power and have the gun and, being able to take a life. And she just says that she doesn't feel anything at all. And that's just how it ends. She just walks away. That's a cool arc, but it didn't feel very built. It felt like there wasn't a build up she was already coming to this point of being able to kill emotionlessly, and then it was Jim's death that kind of was the final, thing that propelled her to that state. It felt like it was just typical, horror movie characters and horror movie situations, and then this one event completely changed her entirely. It wasn't what everything Ryder was doing up to this point, and there was this evolution of a character. It's just kind of one event, and then the turn happens, which is also believable in its own way. But when you see the evolution that C. Thomas Howell's performance goes through, it does feel like it's lacking, and you do kind of want more from the character work here. And I also think it doesn't do much to actually show Jim being pulled apart the way the movie does. Once again, we're 2007 horror movies, so we're trying to be as hardcore as possible. There's something so much more horrific about it being left to our imagination what physically happened to Jennifer Jason Leigh. We know she got pulled apart, but just the hearing the noise and seeing the truck sort of drive forward and just it being in our heads of what happens. I mean, it's a disgusting effect when they show us, and an impressive effect when we actually see Jim pulled apart. But that's just one of those. It was almost pretty predictable that for a 2007 horror movie that wants to show you how hardcore and gruesome it can be, of course they were. It's almost like the whole point of even remaking the movie was to show us the truck scene without cutting away or without fading to black or dissolving to the next scene, and I don't. I mean, it's actually a really fun movie, but it's as far as that's a hard thing to pull off when a movie's trying really hard to be hardcore and gruesome and dark and grim and making you constantly sympathetic of children and their parents dying and them dying gruesomely and wondering if they'll go to heaven or not. Whatever the hell this movie was doing with the kid content, I don't know, but that's. Yeah, it's a lot. But as far as, another complaint that I had about the original movie was how it kind of goes into action territory. Once again, over time, it has kind of felt like there's the moment where the cop goes rogue and is just looking for a reason to kill Jim. And then the helicopter comes into it. But the thing about it is, it does feel like the more grand scale deaths happen, the more Rutger Hauer's Ryder feels like an angel of death, and that's the vibe that it's going for, and so the action basically is horror. It's still part of the horror as the bodies continue to pile up, and Ryder just seems completely invincible, and that's great. Obviously the action. This is a movie with Michael Bay's name on it as a producer, so when it goes into action, it actually does feel like it becomes an action movie. There's a lot of heavy editing. There's cars flying. Now, mind you, in this, area where every fucking thing is CGI now, it is nice to even see a movie like this where you see real cars flying around and crashing into each other and stuff like that. It's fun. And then being chased by the helicopter. It's a really good scene, if maybe too heavily edited. But I still like it. In the sort of... I don't know if it's... I still don't know if I like the detail of putting closer over this scene. Because it is, it's a lot, but I don't know. It's almost adds just enough of a cheesy factor to it that I still like it. It's one of those things that almost keeps them... When the movie's trying to be hardcore, it ends up being cheesy, and that cheesiness gives it a lightness that it really needs. So it's in trying too hard, it almost comes full circle and still succeeds, just maybe not in the way it intended. So that's something where I feel like the movie kind of accidentally succeeded. And just one of those things that kind of gives me an affection for this movie in general. So I think that's about all the points I wanted to make. I went in a bit of a different order than I was planning to, but I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. And just wanted to throw one more piece of praise to Neil McDonough's performance and how much fun he seems to be having and how much fun we have because of that. So there are moments in here where the remake is trying to be really dark and really bleak and relentless, but you can feel those, but it also has moments like that enough where it has like fun moments and fun characters amongst its carnage that make it not a completely unpleasant experience. So as far as gruesome kills go, the one that's always stuck with me forever is the undoing the handcuffs and using the handcuff to cut the throat. That's wicked. So that's one of those horror movie kills that like always stuck with me. And like I said, here though, it gets that relentless nature to it, and that sort of, you feel trapped and helpless, but it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard. It feels like it just sort of exists effortlessly, and then you fall into this movie's world and this movie's nightmarish and hellish scenario. And like I said, a lot of that is not just how great C. Thomas Howell's performance is and reacting to all this, but Rutger Hauer's performance and making it seem like this whole other entity to be afraid of. So when it's set in a very real world, while feeling very unreal, is the twisted nature of it that's always been really appealing. So yeah, I've seen the remake so many times. Me and my brother especially used to just watch this all the time for a reason we never really even knew. It was just like, I guess we're watching The Hitcher again. Why not? And we'd watch it all the way through. And we did that so many times. Haven't seen the original near as many times, but I guess it's because the relentless nature of it and the grim nature of it makes it not as easy to come back to as the remake. So, and the remake is 12 minutes shorter or something, and feels very, very short. So it does have that, but whereas the original movie kind of traps you a little more, which is good and effective. So like, I can't say the original movie is objectively better, like as far as how well made it is and the vibe that it has and how it makes you feel as an audience member. Like I said, I've just got an affection for the remake though, and I've come back to it a lot. So, and now that I've like revisited and really talked about it, it probably won't be too far away from when I revisit it again, just for fun. Like I said, the fact that it's so swift too makes that easy to do. So I think that's all we have to talk about here. So the next thing is going to be, we've got a couple of directors to talk about with some videos that kind of the next two videos kind of go hand in hand. So we'll have those. And then we'll have a few more verses, and then we'll talk about a franchise for a few days, and have one more movie club, and then that's it for October, I think. And so that's what we have. So until the next thing, I think that's it.